Good Thursday evening to you, everyone. How are you? It is good to see you, and it is good to be seen by you. And the person who is glad to be doing the seeing is, of course, me, Bill Sylvie. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm glad that you are all here. And that should be read. There we go. Once again, StreamYard messing up my stuff. RPG Grandma, TB Flowers, and Zachary Melvin, and all you other kind people out there watching. Anyhow, welcome. I'm glad you're all here. RPG Grandma, you're just cool on your own. Wheeling Dragon, hello. Hi, how are you? We have a good show planned for you tonight. Yes, me and my crab. But anyway, Maka, make crab great again. No, that would be Mka. Anyhow, but welcome, Tracy Thompson. Good to see you. Yes, it is Friday evening. Anyway, we have got a good Thursday plan for you. I have a guest who is he's on his way in as we speak. You know how it is. You know, I'm broadcasting from a major metropolitan location. You know, he's in traffic. He's coming here. We got the doormen opening up the studio doors for him, so he'll be along here shortly, and it's going to be a good time. And if for whatever reason, like if because one thing he told me, and I'm gonna tell you guys about this, he might have some weather related connectivity issues. If that comes to pass, I have a B plan, or a B plan, if you will, and I will show you guys something really cool. It's not nearly as cool as Paul Stormberg is. Let me tell you that much right now. All right, we're talking about a cup of lemonade right out of the pitcher versus a Duar flask in terms of differences of cool. But I do have a pretty good thing planned to kind of cover that. So whatever happens, we'll have something cool in store for you guys. But also, I should point out that if you don't get to see it tonight, we'll see it Monday night. I honestly, because I was like, when I have Paul on the show night, or do I want to show this off? Do I want to Paul or show this off? Do I want to Paul or show this off? So we'll see. We're waiting on him right now. I'll tell you guys a little bit about this cat too. If you don't know who Paul is, if you're unfamiliar with him, if you haven't seen him on the show before, you haven't had the circumstance to talk to him, then you're in for a treat. You're in for a treat. Talking to Paul Stormberg, listening to him for an hour, is like taking an advanced course in the history of TSR and Dungeons and Dragons. Let me see. Let's see. Hang on one second, guys. I'm getting a message that I cannot bring over to this monitor. Hang on just a minute. I'll be right back. Got a message that my Ferrari was about to be towed out in front of the studio, so I had to dip over and do that thing. So anyhow, portal open. I stepped through dimension door. So yes, we are just waiting on him to arrive. But anyway, yeah, you can get like a college level education from talking to this guy. And of course, who am I talking about? Well, I'm just going to shut up and let an actual expert introduce himself, because this is a man who needs no introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, an incomparable mind when it comes to the literal knowledge of the bedrock foundation that our hobby is built on. Whether you started playing D&D, but you don't anymore, or you still play to this day, this man knows about it. Please put your hands together for someone I feel honored and privileged to call friend, Paul Stormberg. Paul, good evening, my friend. How are you?
Hi, Bill. I think I might have to pop my collar after that introduction.
Yeah. Give yourself the Mr. Cool look. But anyway, Paul, how the heck are you, my friend? I hope I hope the heavy weather has passed you.
Yes, it was pretty severe. Had some flash flooding, some tornadoes, some quarter-sized hail, all sorts of fun.
Oh my goodness!
But I live on a hill, so the hail was the real problem. Nothing else was. So.
I didn't even know they had those in your neck of the woods. Hills, that is. I thought it was just flat right up to the edge of the Rockies and then a vertical wall.
It's flat right up to the edge of the Missouri River, and then it gets a little bumpy. That's where we live.
Right on. Well, I'm glad you're okay. You and your family.
Thank you.
How have you been, my friend?
I've been fantastic, Bill. So I barely survived GaryCon. It was great GaryCon. We had our Legends of Wargaming room again, where we ran chainmail on the sand table and had Tractics and people running games of Dungeon. We had David McGarry celebrating the 50th anniversary of Dungeon. Great museum display of every printing of Dungeon, including a couple bootlegs, like a bootleg German version, the bootleg Mexican version, which took me a long time to get. Shout out to Dan Ruby for getting me a copy of it.
My God. See, that's the thing. It's like, so here you are just 3 minutes into the interview and you're like, oh yeah, there was a pirate version of Dungeon sold in Mexico. Oh, what?
It was called, you ready what it was called? Calabozo.
Calabozo.
Which means dungeon. And they had a total ripoff of the Rosloff art as well. So.
I am so glad to know that. My life feels enriched knowing that there were kids down in Mexico getting a taste of Minneapolis wargaming nerds playing some Calabozo. That is fantastic, dude.
Yeah, and so that game was so popular that the company created a sequel called basically there was one that was El Escapo, which you were imprisoned in the dungeon and your characters had to get out. Normally dungeon, you go in, get treasures, and then come back out, right? But this one, you were trapped in the dungeon by the wizard of the dungeon and had to escape. And then they came out with another one, I think, which was called Dos Anillos, where you have to go into the dungeon and you have to accumulate treasure enough points to basically win the game. Kind of like going up in a level, you need so many gold pieces in order to go up a level. And that's the concept is you search the dungeon, you find the treasure, you get enough for your character. If you're an elf, you need 10,000. If you're a superhero, you need 30,000 and so, or 20,000. And if you're a wizard, you need 30,000. Anyways, so the other one was you have to, in addition to getting your experience points or gold pieces or treasure, you also have to find these rings in the dungeon in order to win the scenario. So this game just continues to live a life in Mexico without any royalties being paid to Hasbro whatsoever.
Well, that makes me happy. I think that's a very good thing. They have enough money. Their financials came out today and they did huge.
Well, to their credit, Hasbro has published 2 editions of the Dungeon board game. So
that's right. And my My in-laws bought because we had played Dungeon with them, and my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, like when I met my well, it wasn't my father-in-law at the time, but Paul, they had a wall in their house. I mean, a wall of Avalon Hill and 3M bookcase games. It was floor to ceiling, probably 10 feet wide. If it was published, they had it. So they loved board games, and
Amazing.
they played D&D with us for a while. And I introduced them to Dungeon, and they were like, oh, we have to get a copy. They bought a new one, and I was like, well, surely. And I think they got it like 8-10 years ago. I was like, well, surely at this point,
2014, I think 2014 and maybe 2016 were the last two editions that were published, or maybe 2014 was the last. But
yeah, so yeah, I thought, well, certainly this will be like ballardized, it'll be mutilated, it'll be not recognized. No, it is pretty much the same game that came out of TSR in 1975. So I really, as much as I badmouth WotC, as much as I badmouth Hasbro, they had a simple formula and they didn't screw with it.
Yeah.
So
well, you know, the history of Dungeon is very interesting, and I think that is the subject of the show.
Well, we're certainly driving down that lane. Now, I think you probably know this, but you know, I think I can snatch the pebbles out of your hand, old man. In this case, did you know that of course, you know, Tracy Lesh did the art for the first edition of Dungeon.
For the cards, yes.
For the cards, yes. You're well aware Tracy did the cards for the first edition of Dungeon. But did you know it was featured on a Creature Feature TV show? Tracy took it in.
I didn't know which television station and where. Milwaukee?
Yes, and I'm going blank. But
say WTZN in Milwaukee. That sounds
WTZN in Milwaukee. They had kind of a Creature Feature show, and Tracy wrote in, and he would go and like on his own dime, he would take TSR stuff and show it off. Like he was like the host's nephew. You know, they'd put him up in costume, and he showed off Dungeon, and he showed off like I think the Sutherland basic set and that sort of thing, and they had him doing that. So,
so we're talking 70. We're talking 75 through 77.
75 through 77. Yeah. Now Tracy didn't stay at TSR for a very long time.
Was he actually employed by them, or was he just an artist for them? You know?
Well, I mean, we would have to do a show. We would have to get Tracy on, and maybe you and I can grill him like.
Back to Dungeon then.
Well, no, I just this merits mentioning because he did have a hand in the art, but I know Tracy did Tracy did art for the Dragon, so it wasn't just the stuff in Blackmore and Dungeon, but he also did the Dragon. And my painting back here was to have been the first full color art done for a TSR pub.
And it's a heck of a piece.
I wish that was the original. The original is probably 4 times the size. This is a canvas print. Amazing. Yes, this is a canvas print that Tracy gifted me, and it is precious to me, and I will brook it to no harm. But I mean, perhaps not as famous as the paintings behind you, but at any rate, to weave our way back over to Dungeon. Dungeon is just one of those games that's just it's so addictive. I can absolutely understand why the late Dave Arneson would like. his heart must have grown 3 sizes that day when his player sat down and said, "You run our campaigns 5 nights a week and you never get to play. Here's how you can play."
Right. Well,
just,
it was really Dave McGarry who came up with the concept, because
Mhm.
Dave was a programmer. And Dave thought, surely there's a way to program the game so that Dave could play in it. And so it is pretty much just like a D&D adventure. And note, he created it in October of 1972. Okay. So he created in October of 1972. He said in a peak of, or a fit of creative temperament, on one weekend he created it, and then at Thanksgiving he brought it over to his friends and put it on the Arneson ping pong table and played it after Thanksgiving, and it was a huge hit amongst the group.
I can imagine.
But there was a dispute, and there in the Arneson laundry room sat Dave McGarry and Dave Arneson, and Dave was like, "Well, I really created this game off of your concept of the Blackmore dungeons, so I don't want to take credit for it." And Dave was like, "Well, this is something that's just great. It's kind of, it's kind of taken it in another dimension." And they were going back and forth, and it took Dave Wesley to come in, and he says, "Well, it's fine. Both of you have an agreement that Dave's responsible for the board game and you're responsible for Blackmore." And so they went, okay. And that was a handshake deal, and they've honored it ever since. So.
Excellent. That is wonderful. And you mentioned programmer, and this is something that I think all of us of a certain age are probably aware, but in case you're not out there, that was TSR's second ever computer game release, was Dungeon for the Apple II. I eagerly awaited it for the Commodore 64. Never got a Commodore 64 release. I was crushed.
I played it on an Apple II, baby.
Right on. So yes, Dungeon, and I mean, given the relative simplicity of the game, I mean, resource tracking and so on, it seemed, and yeah, as you point out, Dave McGarry himself was a programmer, so it lent itself to easy adaptation and indeed modification. One of our users out there, David Brown, in the chat, saying he wrote his own PvP rules for Dungeon, which I recently found. They were typed on a typewriter with tables. Very nice. Very nice.
I love it.
I have the Rosaloff cover set up here. I'm not going to drag it down unless you, Paul, are just desperate to see it. But my Rosaloff set
I can go get my Calabozo.
You better go get that copy of Calabozo and show. I mean, unless it would be like a hassle, but
it's actually packed in my van, because I'm about to head up to a Wisconsin State Historical Society event called Adventures in Wisconsin, where they've created a set of 5th edition adventures set in historical Wisconsin mythology. And basically you adventure alongside historical figures and myth figures and folklore figures of Wisconsin history, and go on all these great D&D-esque adventures.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. I was talking to the fellow who does our outro music, Owl Bear, Bob Antone, is he's a true believer when it comes to cryptids and that sort of thing. And I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. In discussing some of the work that I did for Gaxland, Gary was a true believer in cryptids. So I told Bob, I was like, yeah, you'd have had a lot of fun talking to Gary about Bigfoot. So it was an interesting discussion. So you're gonna there's some cryptid adventures to be run there.
Yeah.
Yes. All right.
Definitely. The Beast.
How
of
many hit
Bray
dice does a Wisconsin Bigfoot have, Paul?
The Beast of Bray Road, at least 6+6 hit die.
Oh, absolutely.
And immune to normal weapons, only affected by silver and magic.
As befits. Now, does it dimension door? And it has to dimension door because, you know, it's like, it's right over there. And, you know, people run around and they don't see it anymore.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's Jenny, the lake monster.
Yes, the Jenny. That is...
now, you know, Gary has a harrowing story about that, where he, and I believe it's Rob Kuntz's story, but the story goes that Don Kay was diving off of Black's Point,
mm-hmm.
and he came up from the depths having seen something so terrifying, he climbed into the boat and would not speak of it.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think Gary and his buddies were firmly in the belief that there was something bad living at the bottom of Lake Geneva.
I can absolutely believe it. My parents were born in a little corner of Northeast Alabama. It's like 45 minutes from Atlanta. It's that close to the Alabama-Georgia border. But as part of the TVA, the Coosa River that ran through that section of country received a lot of dams and bridges across it. My grandfather on my mother's side worked those bridges, and they had divers who would come up and quit that day at things that they had seen in those dark muddy rivers, and what they would talk about, like 6-foot catfish.
Oh yeah.
You know, things
when I
like
was
that.
a wee lad and quite the angler, I would go to these, we called them box docks, but they were docks that had siding on them, right?
Okay.
Had vertical siding on them so that boats and things wouldn't slide under them and bang into the rails and stuff. They were very tall docks.
Okay.
But if you look down through the cracks in the dock between the boards, you could see perfect silhouettes of whatever monsters were sitting down there. And one day I saw just the largest catfish I had ever seen in my life.
Yeah.
And all I had was my mighty little Zebco 110.
And the only place... go ahead.
Now I got to tell you my angling skill here. So as the waves would come up and meet this sideboard, right? The waves would come up and you couldn't cast under it. So I waited until the wave went down and I cast my bait right in under, and then the wave came up. I was at this all day long to try to get this behemoth out from underneath this dock. And eventually it struck, and I fought and fought and fought and fought and fought it, but it broke my line. Actually, it straightened my leader out. It didn't break my line. It straightened my leader out and went right back underneath. And everybody was bragging about how Stormberg almost caught the beast, da 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 da. And so another kid who was a professional angler, he was a teenager, and man, this kid had all the fanciest equipment. He came out because he used my discovery of where this thing was hiding on the lake. And then he went and caught it the next day, and it ended up being a record carp. That's what it was.
Wow.
It was a huge carp. And this thing was old. It looked like it had bronze dragon scales to it. And it had battle scars, and its scales were gold and covered with verdigris, and it was amazing. It looked like a D&D monster.
Yeah, I can.
But sadly, I was not the knight to defeat it.
Some days you're the squire, some days you're the knight, Paul. But the important
thing I did get
away, you did get away. The important thing is that as you looked at the gaps between the boards there, you didn't go too far looking through them and fall off the end, because as you well know, when you're out of slits, you're out of pier.
I don't know if that was a dirty joke or not, but we should probably.
It was an old beer joke. When you're out of Schlitz, you're out of beer. Old 1970s slogan.
Oh, okay.
I just got penalized $1,000 by Gonzalo. I'm going to need a lot of super chats tonight, guys. I'm already in the hole a full buck, so you guys are going to have to step up with the supers. JP Got Rockets says that.
All right, so let's go back. Let's go back to the history of Dungeon.
Let's go back to the history of Dungeon. Paul is threatening to turn this thing around if we don't behave, kids. So the history of Dungeon.
All right.
I know the Sugar Packets version that I've heard from Tracy and online, and the little bits you've talked about. So make this a full meal.
All right. So I've already described how Dave had created this after he was rejected in the draft for being too light. It wasn't heavy enough to make the cut for. He thought that you had to be under a certain weight and for your height. He did not know that there was a lower limit, that you could be too light. So little Dave, unfortunately, his girlfriend broke up with him, and then he got rejected by Uncle Sam, and so he was just kind of in a fit of a fugue or a fugue or whatever they call it. And so he didn't really know what to do, but he started creating this game as kind of an outlet because he wanted to solve a problem, which he saw, which was that Dave Arneson couldn't play his own game. So he creates it. He introduces it in November of 1972. All the guys love it. They say you should publish it. Wesley settles the disagreement between the two of them, which really wasn't a disagreement. It was just a concern. They didn't want to step on each other's toe. They make that handshake, and Dave McGarry immediately sends the game off to Parker Brothers because he had seen an advertisement that said, "We're accepting outside submissions." And he got a nice letter back that said, "Sorry, we no longer accept outside submissions."
Oh.
And so that was his first rejection letter. And then he happened to be traveling out to Boston, which I believe is the home base of Parker Brothers. And he decided he would just drop in the office.
There you go. If the mountain won't come to Muhammad.
And they again told him, "Well, we appreciate your pluck, kid, but no."
Yeah.
And again, we don't even look at outside submissions because then we'll get sued for having stolen your idea if we come up with a similar idea. And there's a lot of similar board game ideas out there. So come Christmas 1972, Dave McGarry is stuck and doesn't have a publisher for it. Well, Dave Arneson says, Gary Gygax is working for Guide on Games and is getting a lot published. Why don't you and I go down there and I'll show him Blackmore and you can show him Dungeon. And so they plan to meet him, and they work out a date, and it's February 18th, 1973. Now, this is important because the next day, the 19th, is President's Day. And Dave and both of the Daves needed a ride down to Lake Geneva, so they hitched a ride with their friend Pete Gaylord, who was the first wizard in Blackmore. But Pete Gaylord worked the night shift for the Postal Service up in the Twin Cities. So since it was President's Day, he didn't have to be working the night shift on Sunday night. So he was visiting relatives in Chicago. He dropped Dave Arneson and Dave McGarry off in the late afternoon at the Gygax home. And the two of them then proceeded to show Gary the Dungeon board game and then demonstrated the Blackmore game to Gary. And pretty soon they got shooed off the table because Mary was trying to make dinner. And McGarry describes that she was kind of shocked to learn that both Dave Arneson and Dave McGarry were staying for dinner. And of course, the Gygaxes at this time were not well-to-do. And so he said, when she put the food on the plate, she just very tentatively gave me one scoop of the casserole and slowly took her hand away. And he was like, that was a pure signal to me I was not getting seconds.
Too slow.
Then they moved the game to the floor and played Dungeon on the floor. And then they eventually took it downstairs to the basement. But they also played Blackmore, and Gary describes it as, you know, they go to the Comeback Inn, which is a magical inn that you can't leave except through special means. That they wander around in a marsh for a while. They find a magic wand. They defeat some ogres and get a ring with a wish on it. And they go into the dungeon and they face a wizard who casts a fireball and kills the only person who decided to stay and fight it, Terry Kuntz. Yeah, and so that was the original. Those were the original players for that. Was Ernie, Gary, Rob Kuntz, and Terry Kuntz. And later the next morning, and I've confirmed with everybody's stories that it was the 18th, which was a Sunday, because Rob said when I walked over, I picked up Mike Menard, on the way, and it was lightly snowing. And so I went back in the newspaper records of the time and found out that Sunday was Lake Geneva's Winterfest, and it was a bright, cloudless day. And then on Monday, they said, on President's Day, they said we had a light snow, 1/10 of an inch fell, and was a lovely snow that day. So that's what Rob is remembering, is walking over in the morning after that evening's play, and he picked up Michael Menard to play Dungeon again. So again, they're on the living room floor playing the game, and Pete Gaylord shows up ready to get back for his night shift at the post office. And they're just all sitting around, not packed or ready to go. And he's like getting a little impatient. So he kind of lets them play a couple rounds of it, and then is eventually like, okay, we got to go.
Yeah. Pack it up. We got to pounce in, guys.
It's purported that at this time, and there's different stories, whether it was Dungeon or Blackmore, that Gary says, it's so simple. Why didn't we think of that? It's the aha moment. And that is the beginning of both Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeon. But unfortunately, Dungeon is really expensive to publish. And so ultimately they published Dungeons and Dragons first. And then when they have enough in their war chest in 1975, they published the Dungeon board game. And that's why this year is the 50th anniversary of the Dungeon board game.
Well, that
the history
is
of Dungeon.
The history of Dungeon. That is super cool. And it's not just for this, but this is one of the many reasons I love having you on, Paul. I had no idea, right? I was like, okay, some people thought of it, and they introduced it to Dave, and Dave thought it was cool, and somehow it percolated to TSR, and there's Dungeon. This is just a great history lesson, man. And thank you so much for cluing us in. And I just what I love about Dungeon is it is so damn accessible. I mean,
yeah.
Go to the rooms, roll 2d6. If it's this number, you win. If it's this number, you lose. If I roll 2d6, if it's this number, I win. And if it's this number, you lose. And if you win, you get the treasures. And if you lose, either get knocked out of the room, drop a treasure and get knocked out of the room, or you're dead.
So right, there's two functions, right?
Right.
There's you roll 2 dice to defeat the monster.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't meet that number or exceed that number, then you have to roll on a second table, which is basically a CRT, a combat results table.
Yes.
Well, the first part, and obviously the monsters and that combat of rolling 2d6, that is the fantasy combat system from Chainmail. So if Dave was creating a game to replicate gameplay in Dave Arneson's dungeon, and he used the combat system that they were using at the time, which is 2d6 fantasy combat table from Chainmail. Now, the combat results table, which is based on craps numbers, so a 7 or 11, nothing bad happens to you.
Right, 7 come 11.
But a 2, Snake Eyes is very, very bad. It's the worst possible result.
Yes.
And I think that's the you're killed result, right?
I think it
that
is.
Second table comes from Strategos N, which is the combat results table that Wesley created for their Napoleonics game, which is, okay, sure, you did not defeat that enemy unit. What happens to you? Do you run away? Do you get wiped out by them? Does a sudden patriotic fervor overcome your group and you still beat them anyways? There's a lot of things that can happen. And that was one of the kind of magical elements and unpredictability that were in their Napoleonics games at that time. And so you get this perfect melding of the chainmail combat system and the monsters and the creativity and fireballs and wizards and all that stuff and all the monsters. And then you get the Strategos and what happens to you if you're defeated by a monster. And then you get the Blackmoor dungeon experience. And so it wraps all of those pieces of history up into one nice little package for you to see the actual development of the Dungeons and Dragons game. And where Blackmoor goes, takes parts of Chainmail and takes parts of Brownstein, Dave Wesley's role-playing experiment, and then together they become Dungeons and Dragons, essentially.
Amazing, simply amazing. And thank you very much for that, Super Gonzalo. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Paul, I guess I'll have to cut you in for a little bit of Gonzalo's super there. $10 super advanced history of RPG gaming course fee. But no, I grabbed my copy. Go ahead.
I have one more bit on the whole history thing. So Dave and Gary, Dave eventually comes down in April of 1976, joins TSR and becomes their treasurer. But at one point, Dave has a falling out with Gary. Well, he doesn't have a falling out with Gary. He says something that really cuts Gary to the core. But I don't think he realized it at the time. So Dave has this thing about Dungeon and about board games. Dave at the time thought the greatest compliment you could have in your creation is for it to become part of the fabric of humanity. Like, let's say Monopoly. Oh, it's a terrible game. Ding 'em design, whatever. It sells 10 million copies a minute, right?
Right.
It's part of, we say don't pass go, right? We say, park place and we say luxury tax, whatever we use from that game, from Monopoly, it's kind of become ingrained in our culture. And it's in different languages and it has different themes, but it's just really pervasive in our culture. Well, now, because of the internet, people know the story of that game, but for the longest time, for decades and decades and decades, no one had any idea who created that game. There is no person's name on the game. It was just Kleenex, right?
Right.
It was the Kleenex of board games, and that it was so ubiquitous and so common and so accessible that it was just part of being human. Not quite like chess, but pretty close, right? Chess, we don't know who created it. It's part of humanity. It's in our music, our literature, our songs, everything, right? So Dave thought that was the greatest compliment. So he and Rob and Mary and Gary had all been out, and they had had a little bit to drink at dinner, and they were having some after dinner drinks on the side porch, the Gygax house. And Dave just kind of opines to himself, wouldn't it be great if nobody remembered who created Dungeons and Dragons? Because Dave didn't aspire for aggrandizement and fame and fortune. He aspired to be anonymously part of humanity, which is an incredible thing for somebody who designs something. I think it's an incredible act of humility. One, you know, he wanted to go into the game stores and see dungeon board games without his name on them. As a matter of fact, TSR could only price it at $12 because they couldn't afford to get the production cost any lower. And so Dave even gave all of his stock back to TSR, surrendered all of his royalties for the game to try to get them to drive the price down below $10 because he thought it had to be below $10 for it to be a family game. So here's Dave sacrificing everything, all his ego, all of his ambitions, all of the money, everything to make this game part of humanity, which is pretty cool. And it's definitely not what Gary was thinking at the time. And so when he says that, Dave is thinking of it from this sort of great human compliment. D&D could be the chess of the next millennia, right? And so, but Gary was personally wounded by that. He thought that was an affront, right? And, you know, because Gary is a guy with a big ego, right? And so Gary didn't like that at all. And so
I can imagine.
He said, suddenly our relationship cooled. I was like, I wonder why.
Yeah, definitely.
Never hostile. And eventually the reason he leaves the company is because Brian Bloom says, when we shipped these editions to Jedco Games, because there was a licensed Australian version with Jedco Game in Australia, and Brian had done some research and said, well, he didn't tell Dave this. He says, I want you to ship the dice separately from the board game so we can avoid the VAT coming in for gambling equipment. Because if the game has dice, it's considered gambling as far as concerned in 1976. And so the $12.50 price tag is then all for gambling. But if you do the dice and the dice cost a penny, then your VAT on that is tiny. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So Dave decided that was unethical and he quit in protest. But then he said a couple months later, I found out that all game companies did that. It was standard practice in the board game industry. So he said, so I was wrong.
Still quitting over ethics to the Blooms was probably, they were probably going to do something to make him want to quit anyway. So, you know, now I want to I want to take a look at something with you real quick, Paul. To my audience, I hadn't intended on falling down this rabbit hole of let's talk about the history of Dungeon, but my God, I mean,
Bill,
it's
all
Paul
about
Stormberg.
The rabbit holes.
It's all about the rabbit holes.
It's all about the rabbit holes.
It's Paul Stormberg. Who am I to deny a chance to sup from the table of knowledge that he always brings? And I want to take a look at this because I was suspicious that it was the case, and I was actually right. The rules for Dungeon, if anyone actually wants to see what they're like, the rules for Dungeon are still available on Wizards of the Coast's website for downloading. and this is what the current, this is a zoom in on the current rule book. And I was going to talk about the, you know, the combat results table and all that jazz, which we will, but I just, the credits caught my eye as I brought these up. So, of course, I don't think we have to wonder about Gary Gygax, and I at least know Steve Winter well enough, and Jeff Grubb and Dave McGarry, of course. But tell us a little bit about Chris Dubois. Is that it? And Michael Gray.
He did the 2014 adaptation of the game.
Ah, I see. Okay, all right. So
and he was very nice and generous to Dave McGarry, and they had him out to Gen Con to run demos of the game when the new edition had come out.
Okay.
And they gave him a nice table. And of course, Jeff Grubb, inveterate designer at TSR, Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro. He's a ton of experience. And of course, Steve Winter, he was an editor on the Rosloff versions that you're familiar with. They don't list Kevin Hendricks, but obviously Gary Gygax is listed there because Gary heavily edited it, and was the reason why it got published. And then Michael Gray, of course. Michael Gray is probably the most consummate board game designer, historian person out there. When he came to TSR, he came from did he come from Milton Bradley? I can't remember where he came from. It might have been Milton Bradley, but when he came to TSR, he brought some real game design chops and some real, we sell 1 million copies of this board game every minute sort of mentality. So when he came into TSR, and of course, he was brought in to make the dungeon game more of a mass market game. And so, somebody who's not credited there is Kevin Hendricks, who is responsible for the first revision of the Rosloff, when it went from the portrait kind of old style actual dungeon with skeletons and rats picture to the Rosloff landscape full board game box size. That was Harold Johnson and Kevin Hendricks, and they appear to be left off of this list, but I guess when a game's been, I think it is probably TSR's most successful board game they've ever had. I mean,
it is a wonderful one. And again, looking here at the, we're going to zoom out just a little bit so we can better navigate. I mean, setting aside their presentation at Wizards of the Coast of things, when you get down into the rules here, we have the CRT.
It's the CRT right there.
Yeah, right there, just as it was back in the day. I mean, that is it. See, right there.
But they did change it. They changed it from the craps numbers, where 7 and 11 means escape harm. And I played a version of this with Dave McGarry, and somebody rolled the dice, and he and I were both stunned that I rolled a 7, and it ended up with me being wounded. I was like, wait a second, that's not how this, because I play the 1980 version, which still uses craps table results.
Okay, all right. Hopefully, we're not about to see a Fibber McGee
playing this edition.
Go ahead, Paul.
If you're playing this edition, don't roll a 7. It's bad.
All right, so here we go. Here's the dungeon that I have, and it has a bunch of stuff on top of the box. Carefully put that down on the floor over there. Gonna pop out of this real quick. This is the dungeon set that your friendly neighborhood dungeon delver has. That great Jim Rosloff artwork on the cover there. This is a moon face logo TSR box. So I'm not sure what printing revision that would be. Paul, you would know better than I.
That would be the first, second, third. That'd be the third edition.
Third edition. Okay.
So there were rules changes in that. So I mean, there's printings, which there's 5/7 printings of the first, and then there were editions. I believe there are 2 printings of the first. The second edition. There's 2 printings of the second edition, and then that third edition. That was they had a huge marketing campaign, and I think they sold 1 million copies of that game after that Christmas marketing campaign.
I can believe it. I used to see this, and I was very into D&D when I was a kid, but my folks were not. So consequently, I was not very into D&D as a kid. But I would see this in the Sears catalog and be like, man, I would love to get that board game. That looks so cool. But the question of the minute, Paul, I think the burning question that I and many other people who have this need to know the answer to, and if anyone knows, it's going to be you. Who are these people?
I have no idea. Sorry.
You don't personally know all of these people? Like, you can't tell me?
the people in the D&D basic commercial, we know about them. One of them is Cameron from Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yes.
And some other actresses. And Frank Menser was on site and basically described that they were all just actors. And they were there and they set it up, and the kids kind of played the game and they took the photos. And Frank's got some good stories about that PR moment. But this particular one, I imagine it was the same thing. I mean, look at the 1970s decor on the back, on that shelf behind them. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I had that exact shelf in my house with those exact same tchotchkes on it in the 1970s.
Well, one of the sad things about, and this is, once again, you and I will probably be at loggerheads about this, Paul, but whatever. One of the sad things about the boom in the collector's corner of the hobby is you don't get treasures. The common man does not get treasures anymore. Like, I bought my set from Goodwill in the early 2000s. Believe it or not, that was my first blush with I mean, I knew about it. I knew people who had it, but that's the first copy I ever owned. And in getting my copy, I got 2 typewritten pages of additional play instructions that someone did with the corrections made with correcting fluid. Remember, whiteout liquid paper? So yes, and they're not even stapled. It's one of those little studs you would put through a 3-hole punch to hold a set. So I got it's someone's house rules, and I love that kind of find. I love getting a thing and being like, oh, well, what is this? And that was in addition, of course. I have the actual. I am already zoomed in. I have the actual rules right there. With who did the map, Paul? Who did the little map view right there? Whose art is that?
Oh, I'm sure that is Dave Sutherland, or it could be Steve Sullivan. Okay. Steve Sullivan is actually credited with the very first sort of isometric 3-dimensional map in, it's either R1, I think it's module R1 to, what is that, to the 8 of Falx? What is R1?
Yeah. Dang it. R1 is to the 8 of Falx.
Yeah, it's one of the rare RPGA adventures. And on the gatefold of that module, he did sort of a hallway crossing over another hallway. Now, of course, the most famous version of that ends up being Sutherland's Castle Ravenloft, which is all done as an isometric masterpiece.
Right.
From the top floors to the bottom. How he did all of that, I have no idea, because no one was doing stuff like that at that time. And that piece of art, man, that is just amazing. That map that Sutherland did. So it's see who the art credits are for that particular version. But I'm guessing whoever has the art credits other than Rosloff.
So here we go. Credits on the back are design, Dave McGarry, development, Gary Gygax, Michael Gray, editing, Steve Winter, art by Holloway, Otis, Harry Quinn, Jim Rosloff, and Stephen Sullivan.
So it's got to be Sullivan.
Yep. And the art, the scant bit of art in these 4 pages is really a nice little tour of the great TSR artists of the time. You have this absolutely banger of a picture.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite wizard photo by Otis.
Yes,
that's a classic Errol Otis piece.
Classic Errol Otis picture there.
Matter of fact, I collected my first alternate printing just that picture.
Nice.
Because I was looking at copies and I was like, wait a second, there's Errol Otis art in Dungeon? I must have. So I bought a whole board game just for that piece of art.
And of course, my instruction booklet is in 2 volumes now, clearly showing this was a much loved copy. But we have, Jim, I can cram 1,000,000 tons of details, even in a postage stamp size drawing. Holloway has a warrior sticking his shield in the serpent's mouth there. The cross hatching and the heavy lines makes me think, even though there's no signature on it, the treasure bag down here, that's got to be Rosloff. That has that distinctive Rosloff look to it. And then I'm not sure at all who did the snake temple here, but I suspect it may have either been Holloway or possibly Stephen Sullivan. But anyway, so I mean, it's such a great board game. I'm going to be running some of it at the Great Underground Online Gaming Convention, Paul. If you'd like to jump into a game of Dungeon, I will be doing that. I facilitated. I've got a few cameras that I set up and point at the board, and I will move people accordingly to their desires to go, and let people know what's in their treasure pile and so on. It actually works pretty well, and people do seem to enjoy it. Usually for a convention setting, I just stick with a basic game.
Right. And we ran a couple different versions of it at GaryCon. We ran one version where my friend Doug Waltman made an amazing 3D model of it. So you can actually see the elevation differences, and the wizard's room is way down here and the first level's up here, and you have to actually go down to get to the lower levels. And he took the Ral Partha miniatures that were designed for it, painted them all up in the pawn colors, so the elves are green and the warriors are blue, and onward and so it was amazing. And then he and Dave McGarry ran a group of players through that together. Then Dave ran 16 people on the Arneson ping pong table, where Blackmore was introduced and where the Dungeon board game was introduced and where they played all their games. So he played 4 board games simultaneously with 4 people playing on each board. So there were 16 players. And then at the Gygax house, we recreated that February 18th night where they demonstrated Dungeon and Blackmore, and Dave brought his original prototype and laid it on the table, and the players played on the same prototype Gary played on some 53 years earlier.
That is, man, that is really special. But the question I have, Paul, then, did everyone get a single serving spoon of casserole?
There was no food served.
Only one.
Didn't want any greasy fingers on the only prototype surviving of Dungeons.
Yeah. Now, I mean, you'll find no one more vociferous about games are meant to be played, but even I recognize historical stuff like that. You don't just you don't just oops, I spilled a beer, hope that's okay, kind of thing with certain items like that, of course.
But 16 lucky people got to play on that board for the
Man,
50th anniversary of the publication of Dungeons. So
man, that is really, really special, and I'm glad some lucky sods got to do that. That is that's pretty wonderful, dude.
but
And
that's not all.
but wait, there's more.
Indeed, there is more. And
Let's
then
hear it.
I tried to get some of the old guard Minnesota guys to come down and to be Dave Arneson in that moment, run a game of Blackmore.
Okay.
And unfortunately, a couple of them were not in good health or had just retired because gaming conventions just getting too hard for them. They're all up in their 70s and nearing their 80s, and it's getting hard for them to schlep everything to a game convention and stay up all night and get up early and do all of that. So I asked Dave McGarry, and he said no. And so then I decided to do the role of Dave Arneson and run a Blackmore game. Now, a little bird shared with me the deposition that Gary gave in the Dave Arneson lawsuit.
Okay.
And in that deposition, Gary is under oath required to describe the events that happened that evening and what the gameplay was like. And so I took what he said, and I took Rob Kuntz's recollections in his monograph called The Game That Changed Everything, available through tlbgames.com. And I reconstructed that evening and the experience that they played. And then I had Dave McGarry play his character, a thief named H.W. Dumbo, which was his thief in the Blackmore game. And he played an NPC hiring the players to play in the game. And we used what we believe are the rules that were used that night. 2d6 for monsters against chain, and saving throws for fireballs, that sort of thing. It was a ridiculous adventure where they had come across some 180 proof ale from King Funk's Larders, and the strongest guy in the group ended up throwing a barrel of this high proof ale at a Balrog. And in Arneson's game, the Balrogs do not immolate. They're just that are badass, right? But they don't burst into flames. Well, given that instance and all the torches that the party had going at the time, that was the first time that a Balrog ever immolated in the Dave Arneson Dungeons. So that was a really fantastic experience. And I have to tell you, Dave is a very kind of quiet and demure person. He's a wonderful human being. But as he and I were kind of ad-libbing and running Blackmore, that was the greatest treasure of my life. I got to play Greyhawk Castle with Gary. That was a fantastic moment in my life. I never did get to play with Dave Arneson, but I've played a lot of games with his boys, right? But I had never played in a role-playing game with them like that, and it was really a wonderful experience. And so I said, well, Dave, did I do a good job approximating a Dave Arneson Blackmore game? And Dave gave me the highest compliment I've ever gotten as a game master. Pretty close.
That's wonderful, Paul. That is
pretty close.
That's great. And having gotten to game with you once or twice, I mean literally just once or twice, we need to remedy that before both of us are in the no, I don't want to go do that, I'm too old category. You are an excellent game master, and I look forward to the opportunities to game with you with great anticipation. So you getting such an appellation from someone I think is entirely fitting. You are an absolutely wonderful game master, and you most certainly earned that high praise. Dave, of course, lived right in my neck of the woods for a little while. I did run into him a few times. I got his signature on my OD&D books. Never
Dave Arneson. When he was down at Full Sail University. There's four Dave. There's four Daves.
There's four Daves in play here.
Too many Daves.
Too many Daves. Arneson. We'll just say Arneson. Or perhaps we could say Nosnera, but that's another story. I almost got you with a cup to your lips. I almost got a spit take out of you, Paul. But folks, let me tell you, there's two there's two things that are certain in this world. Death and taxes and Paul Stormberg's decorum. So that, trust me, that was not going to happen. But no, Dave taught at Full Sail down here in a little borough that's like 10 minutes from us called Winter Park. And he was a member of the HMGS, Historical Miniatures Gaming Society South. I had heard that he was a member of it. A friend of mine who got me running AD&D at those cons had told me he was there. The director of the convention brought him to my table while I'm running this grand AD&D adventure, which became one of the WGH modules that I published. And so, yeah, he came over and the director introduced him and we shook hands, and he just kind of said to me quietly, well, Chuck here told me somebody was running original D&D, and I came over to look at it, and you're running AD&D. I was just like, sorry, he kind of chuckled about it. He didn't like flip my table or anything like that. But I will.
AD&D earned him $1.3 million, baby.
There you go. I mean, don't complain too much about it, Dave.
That's right.
But
this isn't the game I play, but this is the game that pays my bills.
Yes, I after that con, it was like the Sunday afternoon. Everybody's just kind of meandering home, and he was playing. Gosh, he may have been playing it's Avalon Hill, but of course it's actually Hasbro Axis and Allies miniatures game. And he kind of had a minute, and I brought him my copy of Blackmore, and I asked him if he'd autograph my copy of Blackmore, and he did. And I set the stack of books down, and he went through the entire stack of OD&D books I had and autographed all of them, right next to Gary's autograph in those books. So he autographed all of them, and he was always very, very polite when I spoke to him. But I never. He ran D&D games at a local comics superstore here in Orlando, and it was always one of those. I need to go do that one day. I need to get in a couple of sessions, and I didn't. So, but yeah. Oh yeah. And we have David Brown in the audience. So, there's more Daves than you could shake a stick at.
Dave.
Yeah. Is your name not Dave then? But so yeah.
Just think of the little gray house, the first TSR Hobbies building, the 723 William Street. They had Dave Sutherland, they had Dave McGarry, Dave Wesley would come down.
Yeah. I think,
and they had Dave Trampier too.
Dave Trampier, Dave Sutherland.
Way too many Daves in that building.
Yes.
And then there was, I think there was a Dave Jedlicka too, who ended up being a big part of that community at that time as well. This was a hell of a lot of Daves.
DAVE, no, open the goddamn door. But anyway, yeah. So it was so fascinating. I mean, I never knew half of the stuff you just told me, Paul. I mean, clearly about the various bits and pieces that went into Dungeon. Of course, you may have told me my brain could be falling apart. So, but
a lot of stuff comes out of my mouth. It's hard to keep it all.
Yes. David Brown.
I had a documentary crew come to the house in about 2014, and they wanted to get, all the history they could get out of me.
Right.
16 hours later, I said, "Am I talking too much?" And they're like, "No, this is all fantastic." I go, "You can't use 16 hours of footage of just me talking. This is not going to work."
And that's what I try to tell people when I relate like the 1/8 to 1/9 of the stuff that you tell me that I can actually remember and get right. People are like, "Bill, you're such an historian." I'm like, I'm not. I'm really not. Please go talk to Paul Stormberg. I don't know shit. He knows everything. Paul is the one you want to talk to. It was Paul. Paul was a prophet, not you. So a little There Will Be Blood reference. I don't know if you're familiar with the film.
There Will Be Blood. Yes.
There Will Be Blood. But no, I just this is all so fascinating because I think there's maybe a school of thought that felt that, yeah, it makes sense there'd be a dungeon board game from the company that made Dungeons and Dragons, but they don't realize how closely tied it was to that.
It is a snapshot of where Blackmore was in October of 1973.
Yeah.
And so you can see the obvious influence of chainmail, the obvious influence of Strategos, and then of course you have the role-playing aspect of the Brownstein and the Blackmore games. Just bring it all together to just be this whole new thing.
Oh, be careful saying Braunstein, Paul. I'm told that you can't call things that. Braunstein. Anyway, I was just about to say something silly. But so I think I've told you this story before. I have a bit of TSR board game trivia for you that if you don't already know. The other side of the coin of TSR board games, Fantasy Forest.
Oh yes, Fantasy Forest.
Fantasy Forest.
A big debacle there.
I have never seen. I remember asking the kids who are already in to D&D when I was in late elementary and early middle school if that was good, and they said it's for little kids. That's for babies. And so I never had any interest in it. One of the Fantasy Forest boxes went out with a live bee in it. Do you know that story?
I've not heard that story, but there are some deadly bee stories at TSR.
So up in the attic, there's Heidi and Ernie and Elise and Cindy boxing up copies of Fantasy Forest, or one of the games. She thought it was Fantasy Forest. Let me frame it that way. She thought it was Fantasy Forest. She didn't remember. And they had, bees would occasionally zoom in. And she saw one land in a box, and she quickly put the lid on it and moved it on down the line to be wrapped up and sent out. So someone out there, someone in North America, got a copy of Fantasy Forest with, I imagine, a dead bee by the time it arrived at their house. So nice. I don't know if that's as cool as as it was a cornerstone of the foundation of Dungeons and Dragons. But that's a little piece of trivia I share back with you. A B.
I love it. It's great. I mean,
TSR board game
all
box.
of those stories come together to make it just a better story. So
yes.
And I take a little bit that I get from Rob Kuntz. I take a little bit that I got from Ernie, a little bit that I got from Gary, a little that I get from David and Gary. And I start seeing these stories from all these different perspectives as opposed to one perspective. Because most of the people who were there at the time, they have one perspective, their perspective, right?
Right.
And so it's been my great privilege to know these people and to listen to their stories. And I think you're aware of my podcast, Winter Wizards. It's a 14-episode podcast, which it's the primary sources. It's Mary Jo Gygax talking about what it was like when the game was created and how it affected her family. It's Elisa Gygax. It's Ernie Gygax. It's Rob Kuntz. It's Dave Wesley. It's David McGarry. It's all of these principles that were there when it all happened. And, there's been a lot of talk about, their unreliable sources. Well, they might forget a detail or two, or they might have the wrong date. But what is never wrong about our primary sources is how they felt at the time these things were happening.
Yeah.
And that is the real emotional impact of the storytelling of those primary sources. To hear Mary Jo, wistfully say the happiest time of our life was when we were poor, living in 330 Center Street. And, Gary wasn't of the same mind. And that's ultimately why those two split, is because, Gary was on a path of fame and fortune. And Mary Jo just wanted to shovel horse manure in the stables and throw out fresh hay. She wanted to live a simple life. And Gary wanted to live a high life. And, they just couldn't be long for the marriage for each other. But fortunately for us, they had that time at 330 Center Street. That's when Chainmail was created. That's when Dungeons and Dragons was created. And that was the birth of our hobby right there at that little house. And for Mary Jo to say, the happiest we ever were when we were poor and had nothing and lived in that little house at 330 Center Street.
Yeah. No, I get it, man. I get it. And I want to be careful how I say this, but you and I have discussed this at length, but for our audience sake, I used to be an inveterate Gary Gygax fanboy, and it started first in 1981 when I got a copy of Keep on the Borderlands, and I was like, who is this Gary Gygax fellow, and how is it he has poked me right in the corpus callosum and made me realize that this is what I want. Like this is what I want my hobbies to be. This is what I want. This makes all the happy dopamine release more than any other thing that I do. And then in 98, I think, when I looked on Alta Vista and typed in Gary Gygax email address, found ggygax at Geneva Online, sent a message that said, wow, is this really Gary Gygax? And, he emailed me back, yes, it is me. And I called up friends geeking out over this. I was like, holy crap, it's Gary Gygax. This is the guy who created D&D. And learning what I've learned, I'm still a fan. I still enjoyed his company. I think maybe I was lucky enough to have a lowercase f friendship, but I don't. I guess what I'm trying to edge uncomfortably towards is I try not to engage in the hagiographies that people can approach things that they're really, really fond of. Am I making sense, or am I just rattling on, Paul? I mean, you know,
You are making total sense, and you're echoing the words of Lawrence Schick before we interviewed him, author of White Plume Mountain, editor and compiler of Deities and Demigods for Jim Ward, and person who put the World of Greyhawk box set and gave us all those famous adventures in the back of the World of Greyhawk box set, like the Mist Golem and, you know, those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Dave was Gary's right-hand creative man there for a while for Greyhawk and AD&D. And Dave,
Law Schick.
Lawrence Law Schick, he said, well, if you guys are expecting a hagiography of me, of Gary from me, you're not going to get it, because that's a disservice to Gary. He was an incredibly intelligent, complicated person who broke paradigms and creatively changed the world. And to just rubber stamp him as this god of gaming is too simple. It's a discredit to all he went through to get there, you know? And so, yeah. And so I see, you know, occasional attacks against Gary from people who have no concept of Gary's life arc. They just look at one little item, isolate it out, magnify it 100 times, and say, look what we've dragged out into the light. And it's like, listen, this guy is a complicated guy. He was a guy who broke paradigms. He raged against the machine. That was his job. That's why we have Dungeons and Dragons, because he did not sit in his office as an actuarial and crunch numbers and never leave his office.
Right.
He left his office. He broke down walls. He changed the world. And along with Dave Arneson, they gave the world the 7th type of tabletop gaming known to humanity. I mean, It's just a game, yeah? But it's the 7th tabletop game type of tabletop game created by humanity. We don't know who created chess or cards or dice or tile games or miniatures or even tic-tac-toe. Tic-tac-toe is like 5,000 years old. So for 7 millennia, we have these 6 game types. And then in our lifetime, well, most of our lifetime, my lifetime, in the United States of America, in these small Midwestern towns, and ultimately in that little house in Lake Geneva, the 7th type of game was created by humanity. And I don't know, the guy who created chess could have been a genocidal maniac, but we love chess. It's great. Yeah. It's good for the kids.
Exactly.
But we aren't able to examine that person so finely. So I think we just need to have a little perspective and a little nuance, because we live in a modern age and we need to have nuance and understanding of our historical figures. But
that's a very dangerous point of view. Viewing things in context, viewing things in the frame of time. That is an extremely cancelable attitude, Paul. I'm kidding, Hagar. I'm going to get to your question, but I want to point something out, Hagar. I will absolutely. Paul can talk about that as much or as little as he wants to, but just to the audience in general, guys, you don't have to super chat to ask questions. Paul was.
Oh, you have to super chat with me.
You have to pay Paul. I can't control that, but
I only accept D4s in payment. So 4-sided dice, the only payment I accept.
There you go.
Sharp ones too.
Now, do they get a bonus if they give you magic missile D4s, the ones that are numbered 2 to 5 instead of 1 to 4?
Wrong. Evil. It's a game of math. It's not a game of. Might as well be playing Magic the Gathering with symbols on your card.
Okay,
a lot of questions, I imagine.
a lot of questions, but I want to mention one more thing, and then we will get to some questions here. And that is this, to frame what you're saying, to kind of put the curly bracket on the end of the function that we have just defined about knowing Gary and that sort of thing. You know, because people ask me, like, oh, tell me something about Gary. Tell me something you talked to Gary about. Tell me, you know, this, that, or the other. And I had some interactions with him, mostly email or phone calls, and some in person. And I think my favorite was sitting down, my wife and I being the first ones to arrive at his house for a big dinner. And we were there like 30 minutes early. And so we basically had Gary and Gail's audience for a half an hour. And Gary and I just talked about dad stuff, because Colleen was 4 months pregnant with our second kid at the time. And the four of us just sat there and talked about dad stuff. Like we were seeing Antone and Uncle that we had, you know, just
and
stopped into town.
Gail mothered her, didn't she?
Yes, very much so. But I tell those stories. Wow, he was such a wonderful person. I'm like, look, let me tell you, the window of time that I knew Gary was a very cool person. If I had known Gary from, say, 1978 to 1983, I might come away with a completely different story. I might come away saying, yeah, no, I don't particularly care for that individual, you know. Or maybe I would. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is that people and situations and histories are nuanced. They are not either A or B specifically, and then that's it. Let's get to some questions. And I want to, Hager has been so patient, and he's thrown a super and everything else. First question from Hager. What is a big rumor or misconception about the OGs you want to clear up? Yo, drop some knowledge about the OGs, yo. And I'll never say that again. Pick one. Pick one.
That's a pretty big one.
Yeah, we could burn up some bandwidth. So what is the biggest one?
There's so many. How am I going to think of anything at that? That's like,
okay. Well, you know what? Can I suggest one?
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the satanic panic. Let's talk about that little misconception.
Okay.
So when the satanic panic happened, everybody started descending, like national news organizations started descending on Lake Geneva to get the scoop and to have gotcha interviews with Gary. And, you know, when they started asking the locals and saying, did you know that they have the devil at TSR? I think a lot of the locals just kind of laughed. And there was even an editorial called The Devil at TSR, which is a fictional person for the Lake Geneva Regional News receiving a phone call from somebody saying, Bob, do you know they have the devil at TSR? And Bob is like, you mean Gary Gygax? You mean Gary Gygax? Jehovah's Witness Gary Gygax that had Bible studies at his house at 330 Center Street for 5 years and advertised it in the weekly paper, daily paper for 5 years. He advertised, and you would go over and you would study the Jehovah's Witness book. I can't remember what it is off the top of my head right now, but Mary Jo would set up folding chairs in the living room, and people would show up and they would do Bible stuff. No casserole, no casserole. And so the people in Lake Geneva were like, really? You know, the guy who has Bible meetings at his house on Saturday, the guy who said I shouldn't send him postcards anymore because it's not a Christian practice. And it goes against the teachings of the Bible. That Gary Gygax, he's the guy. And of course, it's all ridiculous to us because we all well know that most of the demons, devils, the magic, the Judeo-Christian traditions walking on water, resurrection, raise from the dead, cure disease, cure blindness. They're all Christ's miracle. It's all Christian magic. It's literally based on Christianity.
Yeah,
and yet somehow they're able to find the devil in it. Well, guess what? You can find the devil in church and the Bible. They talked about him last Sunday.
I mean, the same people at that period of time, and I know this from firsthand experience, the same people at that period of time who would say those things about D&D would then sit down and say, now that I've gotten that off my chest, I'm going to watch the 10 Commandments, which has sticks to snakes, control weather, death spell, all the stuff, all of the things. And that, I think, answers Hager's question about.
So I'm sorry that it wasn't. I mean, that was kind of a general one for all the guys in the game, but really the ridiculousness of Gary being perceived as creating this evil game, which we all know was just hype. It was just a culture war item to divide people and to be political and to gain political capital with certain groups and to unfortunately hurt a lot of kids who could have been helped by this game. Because people don't say, Bill, Monopoly saved my life. Checkers really changed the course of my life. They just don't say that, right? But people,
one of the most
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, one of the most avid and well-known chess players in the world went completely insane.
It did not save his life. In fact, it drove him crazy and ruined.
It drove him crazy. It broke his brain. He ended up living in the Philippines and saying some absolutely horrible things on a sports talk radio station. They gave him a show on out there. But anyway, lest we go down the wrong rabbit hole.
People don't say other games have saved their life, but people say that about Dungeons and Dragons. They say it saved my life. It created my lifelong friends. It created my career. It allowed me to become an artist. It allowed me to become a writer. It allowed me to make a company. It allowed me to sculpt. All of these creative endeavors come out of this absolute fountainhead of creativity and imagination because of the creation of this game.
Right. I mean, thanks to D&D, I'm able to reach literally tens of people. So, it's I have an audience of dozens thanks to D&D. So
the most I've ever DM'd in one game has been 14 people.
Man, I did 24 one time. One time, never again, dude. That I tell people,
you just got to start out with a delayed blast fireball from a 20th level lich. Just clear the field real quick.
8 hours. I did not sit down. There was a dinner break where I got like an hour. But yeah, I'm for the games themselves. That's neither here nor there. All
right.
New question. Vinny asks, although there was a falling out between Dave and Gary in 76, Gary brought Dave back to write the DA modules for BECME. What is the story behind this, Paul?
Well, that is the story that made the documentary crew cry. I told this whole story about Dave and Gary being so hopeful and bringing Dave into the company and having all these aspirations and ideals. And then a certain shareholder meeting happens between the Minnesota people and the Wisconsin and the Lake Geneva people or the Wisconsin people. And Rob Kuntz accidentally says something during that meeting and Gary thinks he's betraying him. And Gary stands up and slams his fists on the table and just makes an utterance of just anger. And that shatters everything. That causes Dave Arneson to be crying in his beer at Popeyes. And Rob Kuntz running out of the store with tears streaming out of his eyes, and all of them going, gosh, I thought it was going to be fun to make games. But at that very moment, Gary saw his whole future, his whole life potentially betraying him, as the Minnesota people said, maybe we should bring on some more board members, and maybe we should consider moving to the Twin Cities. Because guess what? There's not a lot of foot traffic in Lake Geneva for buying war games. But in the Twin Cities, there's a lot of foot traffic. And so Gary saw this as a betrayal. He saw Rob's kind of accidental misspoken moment where Rob was talking about something else. But it really shattered everybody's confidence. And you see everything disintegrate. McGarry leaves, Arneson leaves, Rob leaves, everybody leaves the company. It's only the Blooms and Gary that are left, and Mike Carr. And Mike Carr is a very pragmatic business kind of guy. He's not very sentimental or emotional about things. But Mike stays on because he thinks that there's going to be something to the company. But everybody else leaves. And that's the big falling out. Well, and then, of course, 79, Arneson comes back and says, hey, you're selling the Holmes basic set without giving me royalties. And they're like, well, it's a newly edited version. It's not Dungeons and Dragons anymore. He's like, it is. And so eventually they go to court over it. And then AD&D comes out. And then he says, well, it's still Dungeons and Dragons. Even though you call it advanced. And Gary had lifted whole paragraphs from the original D&D books and just put them in the monster manual, out of expediency, and was trying to argue, well, it's a different game. And so ultimately that whole lawsuit happened, and that was it. Gary runs into Dave, and I read this in a letter to Steve Marsh from Gary. Ran into Dave at his attorney's office when I was there for a deposition. We were cordial and we said hi. And he said, I really don't think he has much of a case here. And, basically I feel kind of bad for the guy because he's basically unemployable. He has a history degree and he was working as a security guard. But then the lawsuit happens and they win. And TSR has to pay $1.3 million to Dave Arneson. And Dave starts earning better royalties on stuff than Gary. Because Dave earns royalties on things that say Dungeons and Dragons on them. Gary only gets royalties for things that have his name on them. That's an important distinction.
Right.
And so Dave actually is making pretty good royalties off of all of this stuff. He doesn't manage his money very well, and he has adventure games, and eventually it crashes and burns. Gary comes back from California after he believes the company's been mismanaged and strange things are happening. He comes back to save the day and take the company over. And eventually, when he makes himself, in March of 85, he makes himself the new chairman of the board and president of the company. And he decides he needs the magic back. And so what does Gary do? Gary reaches out to Dave Arneson and says, I think we should get the old team back together. And I think we can work together and build trust again. No one's ever seen this letter. It's in the Dave Arneson archive. And then Dave Arneson writes him back a week later and says, you're right. We should get back together. And I think we can build that trust again. And that's it. The two have healed their wound. But then Gary loses the company just 7 months later. However, Dave has already been brought in the door to develop Blackmore modules. That was what Gary wanted to bring him on to do, was to bring his Blackmore campaign to TSR. Well, Dave carries on thinking that maybe Gary will get back with the company, because Gary sues the company and is in court with them through 1987. For 2 years, he's trying to get the company back, trying to get control of everything back. And meanwhile, Dave Arneson is just kind of on the track that Gary sent him on, to come back to TSR and to create his works for Blackmore. And so that is how Dave Arneson came back to TSR.
Now, I have heard that Arneson was originally contracted for 5 Blackmore modules, but the Blooms or Lorraine or somebody basically gave him his walking papers after the 3rd one. I mean, I'm asking, is that the case?
No.
Okay.
It was determined that David James Ritchie could help Dave develop. Originally, Bruce Hurd was helping Dave with that, and I believe he met with Mike Cook, and also that other person you just mentioned who just went out of my brain.
Lorraine?
No. Who did I say? Oh, my brain. Oh, David James Ritchie. I said
David.
You don't know who David James Ritchie is.
No, I don't.
Anyways, and so I think at a certain point, at doing all of these adventures, they needed to kind of put the pace. So Dave was basically allowed to choose and expand the writers for it. But Dave was working on DA5, City of Blackmore. And there's an actual manuscript that exists for that. Now, some of the evidence suggests that it was an adventure that was created for Mayfair Games, but then never published. But then I think it ultimately was brought to TSR as DA5, and it's the whole dungeon castle. It's the whole Castle Blackmore. I have that manuscript.
Oh my goodness. So silly question. I mean, did Gary give Dave carte blanche, or did he say, I want you to develop these specifically for BECME, or did Dave say, I'll do it, but I only want to develop for BECME? What I mean,
no, it was an agreed on thing that that he would do it for BECME, because BECME was the D&D line. That was the line that Dave Arneson continued to get royalties on, was that line. So it makes sense. They didn't want to do them for AD&D, because then that's not supporting Dave's royalties. So it makes perfect sense that BECME is it, because Dave is still receiving royalties on the basic and the expert set. I don't think he received royalties on the Master, Companion, Immortals, all that stuff. So, because they started to introduce stuff that was beyond the ken of the original D&D books. Right.
And that is that's fascinating. Now somebody asked, Robert Phillips said something about TSR's auto pool had gotten huge. Now this is one, I'm pretty sure I got this one tacked down, but Paul, I'll let you answer it, about the infamous car pool, the employee auto
fleet of
300 employees,
the nepotistic fleet of
yes,
Fleetwoods. I don't know.
300 employees, 200 of them didn't show up to work. They just drew paychecks, and they had a fleet of 120 cars.
This brings us back around to Fantasy Forest.
This brings us back around to Fantasy
and
Forest.
I believe it was Steve Witt, but there were some definite bits of nepotism going on there. And one of the cousins or relatives who had business experience was brought in, and he was the guy who said he didn't need to talk to these designers and he would handle all the printing stuff. And he ordered something like 100,000 boards for Fantasy Forest, but he didn't realize that they had to fold a certain way to fit in the box. So they had 100,000 boards that were folded the wrong way and they didn't fit in the box. And they had to throw them all out and reprint all 100,000 of them because those game designers don't know anything.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty sure they can guess what size a board needs to be to fit in a box.
Yeah. That's wow.
So that was one of those nepotistic persons in the company.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyways, what were we talking about? Oh, yes. So
cars.
Yeah, there was a lot of extra cars, but it started before that. There's a great memo by Kevin Hendricks to the board and to the executives of TSR about how Brian Bloom's Porsche 911 is an inappropriate company car. And he
really?
compares it to standard model coupes and 4-door cars, which could be used in the fleet and And he says, and meanwhile, while you're spending 3 times what a normal fleet car would cost, he said, you're telling us that we have to take Labor Day off and we don't get it paid. And that we have to show up to picnics. And if we don't clock in with our time cards, we don't get paid for being at the company picnic and things like that.
Who was it you told? This is literally one of the first times that you and I ever sat and talked about TSR history back in the day. It wasn't even on a stream. It was just you and I sharing a beer at a con or something, or maybe even just a phone call. But you were telling me, and I know I'm going to get this wrong, so I'm just going to spit this name out there and then you can correct me. This Dave Sutherland got angry at Gary and said, basically, look, goddamn it, I can make more working as a floor manager to Sears and Racine than I can here. So you need to come across and pay me a little bit better or get somebody else to do the goddamn art. So
no, it was not Dave Sutherland. Dave Sutherland took a 2-cent pay cut because he was working for Minnetonka Moccasins selling shoes. And he took a 2-cent pay cut to move to TSR and start doing art for them. But he said that was worth it. So that's Dave's story. But the other story was Mike Carr worked at the Ground Round in St. Paul, which is one of those Ponderosa prime rib beef house
steak and ale.
That was insane. Yeah. And so he said, Mike was like, why would I take a pay cut to come work for you? And Gary says, well, we'll have profit sharing eventually, and you can earn some stock and some stuff like that. And so then Mike ultimately agreed to come down. But the funny part of it is Mike Carr had to sue the company for their mishandling of the program, which did not pay out appropriately to the shareholders and dissolved it without making any payouts or telling anybody. So there was a huge court case where Mike had to go to court against them about that very thing that Gary had promised him.
Man.
So those are the only 2 stories I know in that vein.
All right. You mentioned something, and I don't like. I don't want to push too hard on a bruise, but I do want to go back and God knows you've got enough of them yourself, my friend. But you talked about the breakup about Dave going to Popeyes and literally crying over drinks, about
crying in his beer.
Rob
Kuntz said that was the first time I'd ever seen a grown man cry.
Yeah.
That was Rob's answer.
You talked about Rob leaving in tears. I remember the first time I ever met Gary face to face is I had talked to him on the phone and we had exchanged pleasantries on the internet prior to that, but was at Milwaukee Game Fest in 2004. And Rob Kuntz was there, and the Trolls had brought Gary out, and they'd invited Rob down. And I was sitting with one of the Steves. I don't remember which Steve it was. And Gary was off doing something, and Rob had stopped by and chit-chatted, and I met him, and it was very pleasant. The funny thing, the scary thing is, like, if we got Rob on this call right now, Rob could probably tell you like what color shirt I was wearing, and
yes,
and whether
he has
or not,
an eidetic memory.
Yeah, like Bill slumped a little to the left because he was carrying his shoulder bag from the airplane on that side, so he was a little tired, But Hager the Horrible, there is a bar and grill called Popeyes. It has nothing to do with the chicken joint in Lake Geneva.
It still exists.
It still exists, yes. Every time I wanted to go, the last time Colleen and I were up there, like we were either in a hurry or it was closed or there was a foot of fucking snow on the ground. Sorry.
It was pretty snowy just for you Florida people.
That's right. But anyway, so I'm talking to one of the Steves, and he says to me in passing, because I had mentioned something. I was still at the tender age of 34, a starry-eyed kid when it came to the things we've been talking about. And I said, wow, just imagine what, if these two guys, referring to Rob and Gary, who again, were both not present at the time. Imagine if you could get all the stuff they've been working on and get it published out there. And he said, this is the first time Gary's seen Rob in 23 years or something, right. Some except, dude, my jaw was on the floor. Like because I was sitting at the TLG booth. They let me hang out with them because I was playtesting some stuff. This was before I started writing for Gary. That didn't happen until the next summer. But they were kind enough to let me basically camp out at their booth at the Game Fest. And I mean, I was there when Rob rocked up, and it was like, oh, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing all right. Maybe it's a Midwestern thing, a Wisconsinite thing, where you're just kind of a little standoffish, but holy cats, I was very surprised that they had not been in contact for such a long time. Or so it was related to me at that time. You're looking at me kind of funny, so I don't know if I was told the right thing or what. So,
no, it's absolutely true. And our podcast, When We're Wizards, really explores the relationship between Rob and Gary, because Rob was Gary's best friend, his drinking buddy, his gaming buddy, his son, his protege. I mean, Gary would write stuff and Rob would lay on the floor of his office, and as it came off the typewriter, he would hand it to Rob, and Rob would say, "That's great, Gary." and after those games, the next with Arneson, he's the first person Gary calls is Rob, who's just a teenager. And here's this 34-year-old guy going, "Hey, Rob, what did you think of that game last night?" Because it's the only person on earth that Gary can connect to, because Rob is his protege. They read the same books. They play the same games. They do this. They do similar research. They're part of the same clubs, and they're just so integral to each other's life that when they're sitting at the family dining room table, Gary has Rob sitting right at his right-hand side, just like his son. Now, Ernie was a gamer too, but Ernie wasn't so devoted to writing and creating and understanding game design as Rob was, because Rob was ostensibly Rob was an orphan. And so that relationship between Gary, whether he is Gary's son, whether he's the protege, whether he's the employee, or whether he's the drinking buddy, you know, it gets blurred. And sometimes Gary would switch on Rob. And when Rob says something thinking that he's kind of an equal to Gary, and Gary does not believe Rob is an equal in this matter, then you have that explosion that happened at that 1976 November board meeting, where Rob is saying, yeah, I agree we need to make some changes. And he's talking about Terry Kuntz wanting to put new shelving units up in the Dungeon Hobby Shop. But Gary thinks he's agreeing with the Minnesota people that they should move to Minnesota. And Gary's like, oh! And he just, it's like, you know, he's getting stabbed in the back by Rob. And Rob is bewildered because here's his father figure screaming at him. And he goes running out of the place crying. And everyone's like, what the hell just happened? Because the Minnesota people had already come downstairs. And it was just Brian Bloom doing the secretarial stuff. And it was Gary at the head of the table. And Rob and Terry were kind of talking on the side. And, you know, Gary kind of says, well, what does everybody think about that? And Rob thinks that Gary's talking about Terry's decision to, you know, add some shelves to the Dungeon Hobby Shop. Yeah, I think we should make these changes. And Gary thinks it's about the Minnesota people. And so that story through their whole life, I think there should be a story that is Rob Kuntz's story, was called The Boy That Would Be King, because Rob was the king of the Castle and Crusade Society, the king of the Great Kingdom. And he was supposed to be Gary's protege. He was supposed to be Gary's successor. But because of their complicated relationship and the way that Gary code changed between being a father and a friend and a game designer and, you know, a drinking buddy, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Rob sometimes didn't catch which Gary he was talking to. And so some of those instances really hurt Rob. But after all their trials and tribulations, even after they had a falling out about the direction of Castle Zagic, and then Rob didn't talk to Gary again after that. They had a very bitter falling out after that, like a father and a teenage son.
Yeah.
And he was like 50 at the time, right? Rob was 50 years old and he was still being treated like a kid at times by Gary.
I remember the discussion thread at Dragon's Foot that was
and that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And it was just unnecessary. But Gary felt Gary was playing some role, and Rob thought he was playing some role, but Rob did not read what mode Gary was in. And so they had another falling out. But you know what? Rob was deathly sick with pneumonia when Gary died in March. And so when I stood in the foyer of the funeral home when they were having the memorial service for Gary, and I saw Rob walk in gray as a sheet of Chicago ice. He looked terrible, and he just was so weak, and he was just kind of, his flesh was barely hanging on his bones. He was ill, but he was there to say goodbye to who was essentially his father for a good portion of his young life. The boy who would be king. So that's what When We're Wizards is about.
Well, if anyone's watching this in the future, click down below. The podcast is linked. Paul, do you have a prefer? I know it's on a couple of different. I know it's on Spotify and iTunes or something. Do you have a preferred?
On Music, Apple Music.
Yeah,
it's all over the place.
Do you have a preferred one?
No.
Okay.
Find it whatever is convenient for you. When we were wizards.
When we were wizards.
It's a realistic look at Gary, but it's all being told by the people who loved him and who watched him go through this period of his life. So it's not me making opinion or, you know, saying he's this person or that person necessarily. It's just listen to the people who love Gary talk about what was happening in their lives. It's fascinating.
Well, I am going to put that link up here. This is literally just the first one I found. So I am showing no favoritism. This is not an endorsed link at all, but it's there in the chat if you guys want to copy it and check it out. No, I got to be careful about that stuff, man. You can't just throw around things like that on YouTube. They'll get on you about that, man. But Robert Phillips says TSR story is a lot of guy drama.
A lot of guy drama, baby.
A lot of guy drama.
Yeah, you've got your dad issues, you got your son issues.
You got
your best friend issues. I mean, Gary went into business with the guy who was his rival for Mary Jo's hand in marriage, Don Kay. So Don Kay was so mad at Gary for marrying Mary Jo that he didn't show up to his best friend's wedding. He just didn't show up.
Well, you know, I've seen pictures.
Ernie tells a great story where when Don found out Gary was going to break up with Mary, he said, well, I'll give you a ride over there. Drove him over there in his sports car, let Gary off at the door. And he says, I'll be waiting for you when you get out. And then 20 minutes go by, 30 minutes go by, 45 minutes go by, and Don Kay realizes Gary is not breaking up with Mary Jo, and he peels out in his sports car and takes off because he wanted to marry Mary Jo.
Well, I will tell you this, and folks, you guys can look this up. Mary Jo back in the day was absolutely worth fighting over. There was something else I was going to my just to lighten the mood a little bit. Because you've talked a lot to Alan Hammock, right?
I love Alan Hammock. As a matter of fact, I ran beneath the dungeons. What was it called? Something like
the dungeons beneath Inverness.
What did I call it? I gotta look. What is it? Let's see. I gotta see what did I actually title this thing? I think it's just Dungeon Ghost. But basically, I have a scan of Alan's original Inverness campaign, which is everything but the Ghost Tower that was published by TSR, and I turned it into this year's Legends of Role Playing tournament module at GaryCon, an AD&D tournament that had 144 players in it, 16 teams of 9. So like the largest old school AD&D role-playing tournament in the world. I'm not sure if that's true, but I like to think it is.
You're probably pretty close.
I think it's the biggest role-playing game event at GaryCon.
Oh, I can certainly understand why. But do you know? We've had, and by the way, guys, if you've not caught, and do a little self promotion here, if you've not caught the live streams and interviews that I've done with Alan Hammock here on the show, setting aside my technical acumen, they're worth watching. Please go and check them out. Alan is a great guest. But so do you know, I know you know that Alan is an alum of the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. But do you know the provenance of the city of the evil slave lords deep in the Dragon's Grab Hills. The name, anyway, Suderham. Do you know that? Has he told you that story?
You know, I do, but I've forgotten it. That seems like a cop out. But Alan told me once.
So Alan's up at TSR in '78, and that's when that blizzard hit the north, like central and northeast United States. Yeah, the city of Buffalo was like completely shut down for a week, or in the words of Les Nesman, monster lizard ravages East Coast. So he's up there in the middle of this absolutely miserable winter. You know, he's a Southern boy like me, right? We got, we got very thin blood. We don't dig that knee deep snow up there, right? So he's sitting up there and he's homesick. He's homesick. And as he's working on the story ideas that would eventually become the A series, he creates this town, this fictional town, Suderham, and it's Old English and Germanic for South Home. Also,
I see.
Also, he did it to as a nod to one of his friends who worked at TSR, Dave Sutherland, which means South Land. So Suderham, Sutherland, South Home, thinking of Alabama. There you go.
Okay. I did not hear that story from Alan.
Well, there you go. And now you have, he tells it with much greater aplomb than I do. Gotta get Alan back.
A wonderful story. I like it.
By the way, Hager the Horrible, not only am I going to buy Alabama paraphernalia with your super chat, I'm going to wear it on the show. Nice. Hager's an Auburn fan. He's a War Eagle. But anyway, so what's next, Paul? What's next? We're going to see each other at EggCon. EggCon.
Run by Heidi and Eric Garland Gax.
That's right. We're gonna be up there.
I don't know if Eric does Eric have a Southern accent? I don't know.
He's from Kentucky, and I mean, as a Southern man,
well, that's not really a Southern accent.
We don't really count Kentucky as Southern. They're like Ohio's cousins. Anyway, I'm just kidding.
They're a southerly northern country state.
Yeah, but no.
How does Daniel Day-Lewis say Kentucky in Last of the Mohicans?
Kentucky, is it?
Kentucky.
Kentucky, yeah.
I could not stop saying Kentucky after
been a minute or two since I've seen it, but yeah. So we'll see each other at EggCon, and then you, of course, Lake Geneva is practically a second office for you. What was it you told me? 15,000 miles on the pickup truck, just between your house and Lake Geneva.
Yep, 15,000 miles.
Yeah. But you've got
and last EggCon, my alternator stopped working while driving 75 miles an hour down the interstate. Do you know how long a Ford F-150 can run at 75 miles an hour without an alternator before it dies?
Not long.
I know. 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and that's it.
Yeah, I wasn't kidding about Mary Jo, Michael. Let's be respectful, yeah. But I was not kidding.
Mary Jo was.
I mean, Fritz Lieber was simping for. Fritz Lieber was simping for Mary Jo. I mean, that should pretty much tell you all you need to know. But yeah. So,
Bill, have you ever seen the interview? Have you ever seen the interview with Fritz? It's a great interview with Fritz. And the guy goes, Mr. Lieber, I'm really pleased to sit down with you, Mr. Lieber. I love your books, Mr. Lieber. Mr. Lieber, Mr. Lieber, Mr. Lieber. And he says, so why don't you tell a little bit about yourself, Mr. Lieber? And he goes, first of all, it's Lieber. It's like the Mr. Dumbass commercial, right? Well, Mr. Dumbass, I think I'm your kind of guy. I think I'm a dumbass guy. I think you. It's Dumas.
It's Dumas.
So it is. It is Liber.
It is Liber. There we go.
Okay,
well, anyway.
go on.
Anyway, so EggCon in July, the Lake Geneva Fantasy Festival in September, I think.
October 4th and 5th, Dragon Days.
Dragon Days, that's it. I'm sorry. My apologies. Dragon Days, October 4th and 5th. Are you doing the mains?
We only had 2,800. We only had 2,800 people at it last year, so it wasn't a big deal.
But yeah, I know that a lot of Florida isn't Southerners, Michael, but anyway. So Dragon Days, EggCon, what is next? What is coming down the pike? Or is that it?
Well, I am going up this weekend for the Wisconsin State Historical Society Wisconsin Adventures. It is on Sunday afternoon, the 27th, and I will have my history of D&D that shows Dave Arneson's history and Gary's history coming together into the middle to create D&D. It's a great display of actual artifacts from both of their collections. And I'll be on a panel there answering questions about the history of D&D. And the Wisconsin State Historical Society has, like I said, created a series of adventures based on Wisconsin folklore. And you can sit down and play those games for free. And they have snacks, handouts, and all sorts of goodies. So, yeah, so that's next. And then EggCon is in July. And I will be bringing the sand table to EggCon.
Excellent.
And
good.
I will be running chainmail on it.
Nice. I have never. You and I have jousted, but I have never actually played chainmail proper. I would love to be able, at the very least, to stand to the side and watch some chainmail.
It will be happening. I run a game called Battle of the 100. Which is a game where each person has 100 points to select their army. We use Gary's system for randomly determining terrain, and then we quickly shape the battlefield in the sand. Everybody lays out their troops, and then we have a short battle, which lasts 2 hours or so. And it's a very fun, quick way to learn the basics of chainmail. So it's called Battle of the 100. I'll run a couple of those events at GaryCon.
EggCon. A question from David Brown about are you doing Arnicon?
Yes, I'm also doing Arnicon, which is after Dragon Days. They actually put Arnicon the next weekend so that I could attend, which was very nice of Chris and Griff. And we will be bringing the 3D dungeon board game created by Doug Waltman, the massive 3-foot by 4-foot dungeon board game with the miniatures. And Dave McGarry will be running his dungeon board game, showing off his prototype. And we are planning on running some more of those Dave and Paul shows where I play Dave Arneson and he plays himself and his original character in the game. And people play dungeon, and then we play an adventure through Castle Blackmore.
That's wonderful. I just want to interject something real quick. Speaking of Doug Waltman and sculptures and that sort of thing, please get the dimensions to that freaking door so I can send you proper size doors for that.
As I set that up this year, I go, oh yeah, I was supposed to send that to Phil.
I have never wanted to crawl deeper into a hole and die than when oh my God, I can't even.
Oh, pshaw. It's a tiny percentage of the massive effort you made to make all that cool stuff. The spikes, the skulls, all amazing.
I will say this. During GaryCon, when people were posting up pictures like the Temple of Elemental Evil was here, I'm like, There's 138 spikes on the roof. Ask me how I know. And I told everybody about the printing and the putting together and so on. Nobody got. I told them there was an Easter egg in the pillars in the dungeon, and nobody got it. And I'm not telling anyone tonight on the live show. I know you know what the Easter egg with the pillars is, but I'm not. You guys are just going to have to.
Maybe we should have an award.
We should. It's something. I'll send a 3D print to somebody because I'm so good at following up mailing things to people. But yes, there is an Easter egg in the pillars of the Temple of Elemental Evil, which, by the way, because I initially when I started talking about it, people were like, "You did such a good job on this skull." I'm like, no. Doug Waltman built it. All right, I just sold the furniture and the damn thing.
Yeah, it's an incredible model, but the spikes really make it. The spikes.
Well, was it Doug said it makes it the difference between like the Presbyterian down on Main and
no,
the
that was me.
Oh, that was you. Okay.
I said when you look at the thing, it looks like the Presbyterian Church in Dallas Fort Worth, and until you start adding the skulls and the spikes, and then it gets some real Temple of Elemental.
Yeah, there you go. You get some evil. Robert Phillips is calling for us to joust, Paul. We've been rambling on for 2.25 hours. I think it's high time.
Bill, I have not had time to retrieve my copy of chainmail, so thank goodness you have it.
Do you need me to put the jousting chart up?
Oh no.
silly Bill tasking Paul that. Okay. I have the jousting matrix. Paul, are you ready to joust?
I am ready to joust.
Joust.
Yep, 2 cups.
I think I can get it.
Okay.
No, that's just gonna make dice.
So I have my defensive position and I have my aim point.
Okay. I have, let's see. I have my aim point and my defensive position is yes, I have got it. Okay.
Okay. What is your aim point?
My aim point is center pale or chief pale.
I had chosen lean right. What's the result?
Lean right. So unhorsed.
Oh, good one. That's 5 points.
That is 5 points.
My aim point was center pale.
All right. My defense point was steady seat. Broken lance.
But not unhorsed. So
not
2 to 5.
Not unhorsed. 2 to 5. 2 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Getting ready for my next one.
All right. Let's have another pass. Corey asks if they're coconuts. Paul does have coconuts, but these are not coconuts that he has tonight.
Okay.
All right, Paul.
I'm ready. My aim point is fess pale.
Fess pale. My defense position was steady seat. Broken lance, unhorsed.
Oh, that's 7 points. So we're tied.
Yes.
Wait, did you just unhorsed me, right?
Yes.
So you have 5.
No, I unhorsed you, and this was I was unhorsed, but your lance was broken.
Yes. So a broken lance and unhorsing is worth 7, and an unhorsing is worth 5.
Okay.
So did I just break my lance, or did I break my lance and unhorse you?
Break lance, unhorse.
Yep. So that's worth 7. So you have 5. I now have 7. So what's your aim point?
Okay. My aim point was actually Sinister Fess.
I chose Steady Seat. I chose Steady Seat.
Steady Seat glanced off.
That's worth 1 point, Bill.
That's
6
worth 1
to
point.
7. It's
6
so close. 6 to 7.
Can I pull it out in the third pass? We will see.
We'll see, you vagabond.
You English knigget.
All right.
All right,
So, okay, I'm ready.
Okay, I am ready.
Ready? Joust!
Joust!
Okay. I think you announced aim point this time.
My aim point was Sinister Chief.
I chose Steady Seat because I can only choose 4 or 6.
Sinister Chief, Steady Seat, glanced off.
1 point. So it's 7 to 7. It's tied.
It's tied.
So unless my aim point is base.
Base. My defensive position is shield high.
Oh, that's going to hurt.
Broken lance, unhorsed, and injured.
Oh, I'm sorry. Basically, you held your shield up, and I hit you right in the belly button. I'm really sorry.
You did. Yeah, you did. That's going to leave a mark, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bill.
Oh, I'll live. David Brown, this chart can be found in chainmail, any edition, I believe, in the back, round about page 42. The answer
and
to
it is
life,
just a single page.
It is a single page, yet it is a complete game. And yes, you can use it for AD&D, and for injured, simply use light, medium, or heavy lance. And there you go.
Well, I will tell you, Bill, that somebody adapted chainmail jousting to AD&D and created it as an AD&D system with that would be affected by your level. So it was pretty nice development. It's in, like, I don't know, Dragon Magazine 112-ish or somewhere in there.
I'll have to look it up. That is pretty fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Paul, it has been
Sir.
an absolute sagacious gas, my man. It has been wonderful to have you here tonight. I don't want to put you in an awkward position. You know what? I'll ask you a question about the next time you're on the show. But okay. In the green room, I don't want to. I don't want to muddy any waters. So,
all right.
But thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here, Paul. I'm so glad the weather held out and that you're able to talk to us. It was a lot of fun, informative as always. And guys, do check out the link below. It will be in the description. When We Were Wizards podcast, delivered with aplomb by the awesome Paul Stormberg. Paul, I will see you in a few months up in Lake Geneva. You take care of yourself, my friend.
Thanks, Bill.
And as for myself, everybody, I am going to mosey on out of here tonight. I hope you will all take good care of yourselves. It was a lot of fun. Thank you for the questions. Thank you, Hager and Gonzalo, for the supers. You guys literally help keep the lights on around here, and I cannot thank you enough for that. So be good to each other. Have fun on the way home, and don't pick up any bulky hitchhikers in overcoats, because God knows it might be an owl bear. Peace. Good night. Love you all.
Have you seen my owl bear? Here's to all the weirdos everywhere, in the woods and in the air. Have you seen my owl bear? Should I shave off all my hair? Bobs are all around, some live in tunnels underground. Some are fat, some are rich, some are sleeping in a ditch. Can you ride a crooked horse without a saddle way off course? Naked as a toad all the way to Smoky Joe's. Have you seen the little creep driving fast in his little green Jeep? He smells like fish and brandy, but his rotten teeth look dandy. Take me to the show, I don't care if fast or slow. From action flicks to dancing dicks, just take me to the show.